Hey everyone! Today we're going to be looking at a budget custom offering, the Skyloong Epomaker GK61XS. The listing said Epomaker, but the board that arrived is from a brand called Skyloong. I suspect they're the same company, so we'll treat both names as the same keyboard in this video. Now, there isn't much in the box, but you do get a few goodies, as well as one of the more interesting modular options I've seen on a keyboard. You get a decent USB-C cable, a plastic keycap puller and metal switch puller, this modular spacebar replacement that allows you to change the spacebar into 3 keys rather than 1, and then finally the keyboard itself. Now this is a 60% sized keyboard that can be found for around $70 fully bare bones, or about $85 with keycaps and your choice of Gateron switches. With this particular video, I wanted to showcase how someone who might be interested in getting into the hobby of mechanical keyboards could get started at a fairly reasonable price point. Now, when I say reasonable, keep in mind I'm saying reasonable relative to other keyboards in the mechanical keyboard scene, which can easily run north of $200, typically just for the case and the PCB. If you fully spec out a custom GK61XS, it's still likely going to be more expensive than a conventional pre-built keyboard, so just make sure you take that in consideration when we're talking about budget. Alright, so first impressions, it is so small. Because of the size, there's very little flex in this board, despite the case being fully plastic. The top plate is metal, which definitely contributes to the overall rigidity of the keyboard. The stock stabilizers also have a nice white and black color scheme, although they are pretty poor quality, but more on that later. Now, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to check this keyboard out was the fact that it's hot swappable. I think that there's a lot of value to being able to change things in and out, especially if you're not quite sure exactly what you like in a mechanical key switch yet. It's also nice because you're only buying 61 switches instead of a full keyboard's 100 plus, so while you're trialing things out, you're not breaking the bank, or at least saving a couple bucks here and there by not having to buy as many switches. Speaking of switches, for today's build, we are going to be using Duroc T1s at the 67 gram weight. These are a weightier tactile switch that come factory lubricated. I wanted to see how a pre-lubricated switch would perform right out of the box, so these have not been modified by me at all for this video. For keycaps, I will be using the Skyline by West M set that I have. I really like the way these look, and I think the white and black aesthetic will look great for this build. These are definitely not the cheapest you could go when looking at switches, but as I mentioned in the actual Skyline review video I did a couple months ago, I think the quality of the keycaps are a whole lot nicer. Before we put the whole thing together, I want to give the stabilizers a quick test run to see what we're dealing with right off the bat. Here's how they sound stock. I think they definitely could use some work, so I took them out to lube with Krytox 205 Grade 0. Taking out the stabilizers here also reveals that there are no holes suitable for screw-in stabilizers on the PCB, so the only options you will have for upgrading these in the future would be to buy clip-in style stabilizers like the ones the GK61XS comes with. In addition to lubing the stabilizers, I also added these Upgrade Keyboards rubber PCB dampeners to each stabilizer. These are just a rubber film that you apply directly under the stabilizer to reduce the noise coming from the stabilizer itself. It's basically the Band-Aid mod, but the nice thing here is they are pre-cut to exactly the size that you need when you're installing the stabilizers. Now, after lubing the stabilizers, they are a little bit better. They're still not the greatest that I've ever experienced, but something to consider maybe upgrading in the future if you were to go for a keyboard like this. Now that we've tuned the stabilizers a bit better, it's time to put the whole thing together. This was a super easy process and took me under 10 minutes to install the switches and the keycaps. Just remember, when you're installing the switches, to make sure that you install them as straight as possible, otherwise you'll bend the pins that need to make contact. Not a big deal to straighten them out if you make a mistake, but better to take this whole process a bit slower to ensure accuracy. And here it is, the GK61XS fully built. Fully built, this keyboard comes in at about 648 grams. That's a nice weight for portability, and I could definitely see myself bringing this keyboard to LAN parties in the future. The size of this keyboard is another big plus for portability. You can see here that the GK61 as compared to the Idobao ID80 and my KB Defense Maja, there is quite a size difference that allows this to be very transportable. Not to mention, the small size also is really great for gaming because I have so much more space to move my mouse. So, especially for things like first-person shooters or MOBAs like League of Legends, it's nice to have that amount of free movement for your mouse when you're playing those types of games. From a productivity or work perspective, however, I don't think I could really use this keyboard. As it's so small, it relies on different layers to be able to access other functions that aren't physically on the board, such as the delete button or the directional arrow keys. Because it lacks physical arrow keys or a delete button, I have to press an additional key in order for me to make that keyboard action. I definitely can't use this for work as I need a dedicated set of arrow keys, as a large part of my day-to-day work involves looking at spreadsheets, writing emails, and things like that where I'm constantly using that arrow cluster. The GK61XS does have this little handy sheet that shows you all of the different functions on the different layers that you have access to, but for me, it's not worth trying to remember exactly what combination of key presses I need to push in order for me to do my work. Still, it's pretty cool that this has so much functionality despite being so small. You do have to learn it, obviously, but for those who are willing and want that smaller form factor, it's definitely viable. The RGB isn't super bright or anything to really write home about. I am using switches that have a dark housing as well as keycaps that are opaque, and that certainly contributes to it, but I don't think these are very bright to begin with. Another really nice feature of this board is the fact that it also supports Bluetooth. Now, for me, Bluetooth isn't a feature that I specifically look for as I'm wired in 99% of the time, but I like the fact that you are able to pair the GK61XS on up to 3 different devices. So if you have an iPad or you type on your cell phone for one reason or the other, you do have that option with this keyboard. Now, the Duroc T1 switches that I put in this board, the factory lube is not too bad. I think that it would still benefit from a lubricant like Krytox 205 Grade 0, especially on the springs, because there is a bit of a ping there. These are quite serviceable and not too bad right out of the box. Have a listen. I thought that the keyboard sounded a bit hollow during my initial typing test, so I took the whole thing apart again and removed the PCB to see what was underneath. There are 7 screws that you first need to take off, and you need to then gently wiggle the whole PCB and top plate away from the case. Make sure that you're careful with this last step, as you don't want to rip out that USB-C port from the PCB. Once I removed the PCB, it revealed the battery as well as 0 dampening foam to speak of. Fortunately, I had some extra shipping foam from a previous order that I cut to size and then added to fill in the space. All in all, I used about 3 layers of foam at approximately 2 millimeters per sheet. here was the result. Now, the difference isn't massive between foam and no foam, but I do think it did reduce some of that hollowness or pinginess in that original test. But you let me know what you think in the comments below. To sum it up, I think this is a really nice board that would allow anyone to dip their toe into the hobby of mechanical keyboards. At this price point, it isn't a huge cost commitment, and there are a lot of things that you would be able to do from a customization perspective with it down the line. For me personally, this is going to be a board for testing and reviewing switches on the YouTube channel in the future. Although it's limiting for me in terms of my day-to-day work with the lack of additional functionality such as a dedicated arrow cluster, I still think this is going to get a lot of use for me. So what do you think about the Epomaker or Skyloong GK61XS? Is it something that you're interested in? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.